Welcome to our roundtable panel to discuss the making of the Amazon Prime Video series I'm a Virgo. The series follows Cootie, a 13-foot tall teenage boy from Oakland, California, who has been sheltered all his life, but finally starts to explore the outside world and all the consequences therein. I'm here with series creator Boots Riley, actor and executive producer Jharrel Jerome, costume designer Deirdre Elizabeth Govan, production designer Maxwell Orgel, and visual effects supervisor Todd Perry. I'll start with Boots. This is such a unique premise, and you build such this incredibly deep, interesting world. Where did the inspiration for this story come from?
Just wanting to talk about the differences between perception of people and how they perceive themselves. And I thought about uh, you know, the fact that if you saw a 13-foot tall black man walking down the street, the last thing most people would think about is what he thinks about himself. And so I wanted to talk about that, how that extends to the world, and it also creates a disconnect, right? And so the show talks about people connecting to each other on a personal one-to-one level, but also on a societal level. So and obviously, there are more explicit political themes that allows us to touch on as well.
And Jharrel, what stood out to you about Cootie as a character that made you especially want to play him?
Everything. uh, you know, I'm standing 5'8" strong. So thinking of the challenge physically, of course, but also just the nuances of who he was, being confided his whole life. Normally, when you think about a child being confided his whole life, it's some torture involved, or he's being, abandoned from the world purposely in a way that's negative. But Cootie's well fed, he's well read, he's well exercised. So it was fun playing it, towing the line between the intelligence that was taught to him and the complete unawareness of how to move socially and social cues and all that. So I think for any actor, that's just exciting to have to figure out where in the middle you sit. And Boots and I had a lot of conversations about how far we wanted to take that. So yeah, it was really cool.
And Boots, one of the important decisions you made, and we'll get to talk to your creative team about this, is you used practical effects,
Yeah.
a lot of forced perspective. What was behind your decision to shoot it that way and keep it natural?
Well, I always say, uh, we've gotten so used to CGI. I'm not against CGI, and we used a little in this show. But I think we've just gotten so used to it in the way that it's used that it's not impressive anymore, no matter how much they spend on it. It's just there. And I feel like I wanted to use tools that allow us to feel the textures of things. Like I think there's something that we don't know yet about how light works, to where even if you try to mimic it all the way, there's something that we pick up that's different. And I always say, like, with CGI, you could make a skyscraper stand up, walk over, and take a shit, and it wouldn't be amazing. And that should be amazing, you know? And so, yeah, I want things to happen in camera. I mean, the other aspect of that is that the more that we could make things happen in camera, the more we can see what it is right then, as opposed to somebody promising, "Oh, we'll make this better later on." That's scary to me, right? Because you never know what's going to happen. Oh, we ran out of money, or the person we wanted to do this thing, they weren't available, right? That sort of a thing. So it's about also just being there, and then it's also about creating a spirit on set of, you know, that fun thing. And I grew up watching like the behind the scenes of like Star Wars and stuff, where this like they're in there putting this together, you know, and they made that thing work. And that's what I want to be doing in movies. But that being said, even the practical stuff took, you know, VFX, but just in areas of the screen that you wouldn't be looking because we're removing stuff or we're doing things like that. So.
And Todd, you know, as visual effects supervisor, what did you think about the use of practical effects, and what are some of the first considerations that go into a project like this?
Well, getting over the initial fear of it was the first step, because I'm coming from a digital and a CG background predominantly, but I'm such a visual effects history nerd. Just like Boots, I was watching all of those behind the scenes stuff. So academically, I knew what we needed to do. And then Boots had the confidence that I knew what needed to do. And so the first thing that went into it was planning all of the shots. Now, Boots and Jharrel and then our cinematographers wanted to play it a little bit loose. They wanted to be able to block things naturally. They wanted to kind of figure out what the shots were, which traditionally is not a thing. Traditionally, you'd like go, this is the shot, and these are all of the parameters that we have to abide by. So we had to be a little bit flexible with that, but we also needed to be able to prove that the shot could work, especially in some of these really confined spaces. And so there was a lot of planning involved during the prep, where we were prevising the stuff out, but it was more like tech viz. It was taking the measurements of the rooms that Max had designed and making sure that we could actually fit a camera into this position and accomplish the forced perspective shots. So that was the first step. And then the next step was working with the crew who had never done this kind of stuff before. And so it was a learning process for everyone to take a look and go, okay, well, where does this thing go? Why does this thing go here? Do I need to worry about this thing over here? And I think everyone got on board really fast, but there was definitely a learning curve with the entire crew getting. I'm sure there was some for you as well, Jharrel, where you're like, oh, well, the person I'm talking to is 12 feet that way.
Yeah, never looked. I never got to look at anybody in the eye once. It was either
Right.
X mark or we tried the iPad out for a second.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to say, you know, when Todd came on, he was like, I haven't done this before, but I want to, right? And the other thing is, I will say this, that a lot of other VFX people secretly whispered to the studio that we shouldn't do it this way, right? Because it just because it hadn't been done. And I think so much of TV and even movies are just, you know, a conveyor belt production line. And so, yeah, if you want to have a efficient conveyor belt, then yeah, you don't do it this way. Right. But if you want to have things with variance and personality of what happened then and at that time and in that story, then you look for other ways to do it.
Yeah. And you have to lean into what you're shooting and be okay with what you're shooting, even if it may look not perfect, because we're not doing this so that we have the agility to that CG allows, where we can just kind of iterate over and over and over again. It's like, we're doing this now, and we got it in camera, and this is what we're using.
Max, you know, creating that forced perspective requires like different sets and at different scales. How challenging was that?
Yeah, I mean, it's always, you know, I come from a background where I get to play with a lot of practical effects as it is, and some of these tricks. And so I knew what Boots wanted to do. And when I first read the script, you know, and kept that in mind, I'm like, oh, this is going to be something else. Like, you're building a world in the first place. You're already putting that effort into creating this environment for what it is, and then you have to take certain considerations all the time, depending on which of these kind of visual tricks we're deploying, on how we want to execute that. One of the larger challenges, and I'll reiterate that too. It's like, working with Todd in the early days and us formulating how we really worked out and planned these things out was massively helpful in executing. I mean, across the board, it becomes a massive collaborative effort. Every single department needs to kind of understand the process for this. And then, it's things as small as, 3D printing light switches for a house, building in half scale, or a room, or things like that. It gets pretty interesting real fast, but the challenge is there, but it does do something to the overall look of the piece. It adds something that I think is kind of, immeasurable. Yeah.
And Deirdre, when we first meet Cootie, like, he obviously doesn't fit in, average clothes. So we see this sort of patchwork costuming that is put together for him. What was it like conceiving of that look, and putting that together?
I'll just start by saying it's definitely, when you take on a Boots Riley project, you should be prepared to throw out the rule book that you may be used to working on in this capacity. Having been one of his previous collaborators on Sorry to Bother You, I was very well attuned and adept for what I was getting myself into. And I say that because the way you construct and think about creating costumes for characters, not just in human scale, but in multiple scales, I denote that as one massive math problem. It was definitively very clear that I was going to have to take the traditional aspects of how I create costumes and completely forget everything that I learned in graduate school and go against the grain and go against types. So it wasn't just that it was patchwork clothing. Those pieces were drapes, those were blankets, those were any and everything that could be found in that home to create these clothes for this growing child who ultimately was being housed at home, sheltered at home, and protected from the world. In that, there are also several iterations of what happens when he goes out into the world. So you then explore Cootie wearing denims, patchwork denims. Originally, Cootie's costumes were topping out at 100 changes total for the series. And Boots and I had a creative conversation of how to pull back. Not only did we not have the financial resources, but we didn't have the time. And Boots left me with her. It was very clear, and understanding how to approach this problem and creating the looks for not just Cootie, but the cast as a whole really leaned on that. And that's the history of how
Deirdre, you're creating this character of Cootie who obviously doesn't fit into average size clothing for average people. So you're creating this sort of patchwork look for him, especially at the beginning of the series before he gets his custom outfits from the company he works for. What was it like working on those looks, to create this look for Cootie?
Well, I always like to approach it from the standpoint of when you're working on a Boots Riley project, you have to be prepared to throw out the rule book. As a hyper collaborative visionary, you have to understand that you need to break the rules of form follows function and understand how to approach a situation of creating a multitude of costumes, not just in human scale, but in many scales for a character. And so as it pertains to Cootie, I really leaned into the fact that he had multiple changes throughout the series and how to bring that down and make it feasible, not only to create, but to produce based upon the budget and the timeline we had. And Boots was really instrumental in sharing some insight and said, think of it like a comic book. So I applied that theory and understood and did the research and understanding how cartoon characters were created and that they usually only wore one costume or one look. And they only changed their clothing when the script demanded that. So that concept is really the driver behind how I created Cootie's look, and also how he evolved throughout the season for his costumes. And I definitely you'll find that his patchwork look is really from any aspect in the home, from drapes, from bedding, from curtains, anything that his aunt could find to build his look collaboratively. So I think we were successful in really addressing not only scale, but also size, because we also, whatever we created for the human scale, we had to make in Cootie scale, large, 13-foot scale. So we were very challenged. We were filled with quite a few challenges on that, but I feel that we were able to service the story in that way.
And so in pulling off the effect, obviously there's, you know, the VFX and the planning of the practical effects. There is the production design, which can make a half scale thing behind Jharrel to make him look giant, but it wouldn't pull it off if he was wearing this t-shirt, right? I mean, maybe people wouldn't quite argue, but you something would be off. And sometimes we're really tight on him, and we need to still feel like he's a giant. And the clothing is a big part of us buying into it. The fact that he's got half scale stuff on, the fact that the dolls, you know, we have these half scale dolls that we're shooting over, that the clothes are the same on them as on the full scale actors. The fact that you know, the 13-foot tall doll has, you know, clothes on that match what Jharrel is. So that was a big part of our scale thing, was the clothing.
And it's the trick of the eye, because we had logos that we had to make, create, and then scale up or scale down. And so Boots was very specific about we need to feel that Cootie is big. We need to feel his size. So to that end, that's why whatever we created and printed had to completely support the feeling of scale, from a extra large supersize to human scale to half scale.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say here's another thing across the board that made things easier and harder, is like a lot of the things that I like aesthetically are kind of pushing things, right? Like pushing the colors, you know, bolder lines, this and that, which already kind of puts you in a sort of heightened place. So that can, you know, theoretically work against doing some effects, because people are already, you know, it's already kind of cartoonish, it's already this and that. But so everybody had to kind of play with that line of, you know, we're seriously doing this film, we're seriously doing this show. Yeah, we're pushing things, and this is visually funny. This is also serious and real, and you're going to feel this. But you know, we're having you buy into many things at once, and so in a certain way that helped us, because we were able to across the board kind of have with effects, with production design, with costume design, have this sort of janky feel to it that I think is the opposite of what many productions are going for, is this sort of slickness, like, hey, we've got money and we did this. Well, we know you're a big streamer, you've got money, we know that. So what? So we're going into creating a feel, creating an emotional feel with everything we're doing. And I think Jharrel had to walk that line too, because, you know, he's playing a character that's not only in this, you know, surreal situation or absurd situation, but playing him as a real person that we feel. So
The world is authentically artificial, which I stole from Greta Gerwig for her describing how how Barbie Land was. But don't worry, I actually told Greta that I was going to steal that.
Yeah.
So we're clear.
And Jharrel, you know, playing this larger than life literally character, and you mentioned that you're not like looking your co-stars in the eye. How did you connect with your co-stars in some of these interpersonal relationships when you can't interact with them in the conventional way?
Yeah, I think we have to give it up to Boots for that. Boots curated a space for us offset often, especially the core cast members to just hang out and chill. So I midway, it didn't feel like set anymore. It kind of just felt like we were going to college and like getting on campus again and going to class, and just being ready to kind of take whatever came to us. I think for all of us, we were nervous. And when I say all of us, I mean specifically Brett, Olivia, Elias, and Kara. We knew that this wasn't going to be a cakewalk, and just like Deirdre said about having to throw the rule book out when you're working with Boots as an actor, it's the same thing. A lot of the tools and tricks you learn to kind of get yourself in the zone or get yourself into the character kind of goes out the window when you're in a hunched over posture for an hour as they try to make sure that the set, the shot is right and doing the math right around my body. So, like I said, mental gymnastics. One part of my brain is thinking about eye lines, and the orange tape means it's the second position they're in, and the green tape means it's the first position they're in. And then the other side of my brain is remembering the choices and the connection that I have with my scene partners. So yeah, just getting to know them offset helped a lot. You can close your eyes and you can imagine Brett's face when he's making a certain joke. You can close your eyes and see Olivia's smile when she's talking to you. So I'm very grateful Boots was able to do that. He was very specific about that. We chilled at his pool every Sunday.
Yeah.
It was a thing.
Yeah. Well, they had us shoot the bulk of this in New Orleans. So that was one of my demands, was a pool, because it was summertime. And but I also was like, it was fun to see that the cast, I mean, they're a young cast, and it felt like they were at summer camp. He said college, but they were like, practicing dance moves doing karaoke, and like it seemed like the time of their life. And they were all, if you needed to find one of them, you just call the other one, and they're all hanging out, so they built their connection offset. And yeah, that was very important. And I think also, though, some of the disconnect that still remain is part of the show.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Or are struggling to connect.
Yeah, it even helped shooting a lot of my scenes isolated. I was alone in the small house, and so it fed into a lot of what Cootie experienced in his life anyway. So just a lot of not knowing what I'm doing, a lot of being confused as to what's next, and a lot of being alone while on set. It just all fed into who Cootie ended up becoming.
Now, another important character in the series is the hero, played by Walton Goggins, the primary antagonist of the series. Boots, what inspired that character?
I mean, most of the characters are inspired by myself, right? Including the villains of all my stuff. So, when I was 12, maybe I was having a psychotic episode, I don't know, but I decided I was going to be a superhero. Actually, I was going to heighten my senses like Daredevil, and I was taking gymnastics, I was taking martial arts, I was I was working out and getting things ready, and I was like reading up on ninjas and practicing sneaking into rooms where you can't hear me, and throwing ninja stars, all that kind of stuff. And had I gone to, and my idea was, oh, I could get myself, you know, buff and I learn all this stuff and I could fight crime. So I would have been a cop probably, you know, had I gone on that line. I mean, the things that took me off of that path was first changing my obsession from superheroes to Prince, then changing from Prince to revolutionary organizations. So we don't have that change from that to Prince to, you know, in this, but definitely all of those things saved me. And at the time, and so all of these characters are pieces of me. Now, then when you write them and you try to make them real characters, you give them their own life, then the actor comes and they bring their own experiences and their views on it, and it becomes its own thing. But I think the only way for me to make it true is for me to make a character and that makes decisions that I can understand, right? Not that someone else would do, right? So I you know, put them in the situations that would cause them to make those decisions, even if it is not something I agree with. It's some place that I've been. It comes from something in my life, and I think that's a similar thing to what actors do, you know.
Deirdre, how did you create the super suit for the hero?
Wow, that was a journey unto itself. Quite a bit of research. I went back and took a look at quite a few costumes and armory from the Middle Ages all the way up to King Arthur and knighthood, and trying to really understand psychologically the hero and how he saw himself. And through that research, I worked with an incredible team, Steve Wang from Onyx Forge, and they were able to take my approved vision once Boots had sanctioned it and really bring it to life. And it's the first time I ever created a super suit, a superhero like this. And it was it hinged on a lot of details: comfort, form, functionality, because the hero had to fly. So it really relied a lot on me interfacing with our incredible prop master and his team, as well as Steve's team, and also making sure that everything fit cohesively into the set that Max was building for the hero. So I really wanted to make sure I was telling a story with his armor. So there's little details etched within the armor of itself to symbolize technology, the high tech aspect of it, but yet the silhouette of the hero's armor was going back to the days of old. And so I really tried to bring all of those together as a connective tissue to formulate his costume for the show.
And Max, how did you design his lair? It's very, very clean, very sharp, a lot of like concrete details. And what was it? Where did those ideas come from?
That was actually a lot of fun. If anything, I think what we were looking for is a good contrast between the rest of the world. This entire show has a lot of breadth between the different things that we end up showing, different worlds within the world. You know, I've always wanted to be able to have some fun with a good minimalist, brutalist environment, and it grew more out of a discussion when we were talking about what the building on the exterior looks like. And that building is a character in its own right at this point. It moves around him, you know, it does all of these things. And so his home being a part of it, we went through a lot of different references, a part of, you know, what does this identity look like? And Boots and I both have a lot of love for brutalism and like Soviet modern styled architecture. So looking at some references that never were built from like Valenti, we kind of came up with this crazy building, and then the inside started to unfold, you know, in its own right. And normally when you do even a TV show, they'll force you into like a location for shooting some of these things because it's a large space and it's, you know, it's a big set. But because of some of the things that we needed to do and had to execute because of our tricks, you know, and the rest of it, we built it, and it was so much fun to build something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. For folks that haven't seen it yet, the hero is played by Walton Goggins. Does an amazing job. And also, and the building instead of, him getting in an elevator to move up, the whole building moves around him, which we also did, besides the set, we also did in miniature to be able to move stuff around him and also to shoot the outside.
Yeah, and Todd, what went into the hero, his surroundings, his his action?
Most of it was shot on green screen stuff. So we had him on harnesses, or we had a stunt guy in the suit on harnesses, and we augmented a little bit of it. Like we needed to have his little helipack spinning and so forth, and it wasn't practical to do it practically. And so we just threw in some CG there. And then for integrating him into the miniature sets, like when he's going up and down on his little platform, 3210 built 5 different floors, and then we did a motion control move on each one of them. And then since they were all the same, we could loop them and then adjust the speed and everything to make it look like he's going faster, slowing down. And then we did a little bit of color correction on him, on Walton, to make it feel like he was on those different kinds of floors. And that changed whether he was in his suit or not. Like we had practical lights that were running up and down to make it look like the lights were he was passing through lights. And then we did a little bit of comp manipulation to kind of soften those down and incorporate them into those scenes. But mostly it was Walton in a suit and then we had a miniature puppet version of Walton. And I think we had one shot where we had built a digital version of him. But all the rest of it was pretty much him. Did that answer your question?
Amazing.
And another especially interesting aspect of the series is Jones has this power of psychic theater, which is, I think, one of the most original ideas in the series. Boots, how did you come up with that?
Well, through a series of things. One, I'm always trying to, push myself, push my boundaries. And since I kind of am known for having no boundaries, it becomes harder and harder. So I had to think about the thing that I wouldn't want to do. And what I've been running away from most of my life is black box theater. Like, my grandmother was the director of Oakland Ensemble Theater. I was involved in theater stuff as a teenager, and then, instead went to film. And to me, like, especially political people doing stuff with a political bent. I mean, black box theater is accessible. You can do a thing there. And it also, honestly, and I can say this as someone having come from there, it makes me cringe, right? Often, because there can be a lot of productions that are just not great, right? And so it's something I was scared of. And so I was like, well, okay, so is that a thing that I can do and have in there, have it be entertaining, have it feel dynamic, but take something from there. And so that was something in my head. Because I'm always thinking artistically how to do a thing I shouldn't do. And so I also had the need that okay, this character, Jones, is going to be proposing things, saying things that we could easily wrap up in a few lines, and she could say that and move on with the story. But I was like, it's funny. Kwame Ture had this speech he used to give about TV, and he said that his mother watched General Hospital for like 40 years. and learned absolutely nothing about being in a hospital, right? Learned nothing about how it works. Could have over 40 years learned something like how to, give someone a shot or something like that. And so, the most TV usually teaches us is supposedly how cops talk to each other behind the scene, or something like that. So I was like, okay, let me see how I can bring people along on this. And that's where that came from. And so she has a power. Basically, she's good at arguing. And so she has a power. She takes you into this world that's all built of stagecraft, but it is hopefully exciting and dynamic and moves around and does something that other shows or films don't do. But in order to bring you into that world, I wanted us to have something that felt practical, that felt there and tactile. So we did this thing, and the mechanics of it actually was something that Max came up with, which was we have this material, and it starts about here in the frame, and it pulls back behind her, but we play it in reverse, so it looks like every time she goes into this sort of black material comes out over everyone. But
Max,
I wanted to bring people along with that character and why she was thinking the things she was thinking.
And briefly, Max, if you could talk about coming up with that visual, and we can wrap up shortly after that.
Sure. That one part kind of reminded me of like a reverse parachute. It was some kind of way to envelop, an entire crowd, and it works quickly. But I think the most exciting part about psychic theater is, especially as I was reading it, as we were reading it, there are parts of it that lend themselves to different formats. There's things that are obviously more theatrical and theater oriented. Then I'm like, it feels more like, infographic, and we were like, can we deploy animation in some of these parts of the sequence? Do we do abstracted reenactment? It lends itself to everything. And then the trick would be to how do we merge them together into one exciting and entertaining, process. But that was a lot of fun to do.
So yeah, we had Mystery Meat animators. They are stop motion animators that also worked on Sorry to Bother You. They made this stuff that moves around. They also, by the way, did the parking tickets cartoon that shows up in there. There's like a 2.5D sort of a thing. And that was actually something they pitched to me because I originally saw it as more of a Simpsons-like animation, because I know them as stop motion. So I didn't really see it, but they pitched this thing that really worked with like various planes of things moving, and it so you get this effect on there that I'm not aware of having seen recently.
And I wish I could talk to you guys for another hour about this show. There's so much to discuss, but we can end it there. And I want to thank you guys so much for talking with me about it. Congratulations on the show. And fingers crossed with the awards season coming forward.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, yeah. Wait, you guys are called this Gold Derby because do people bet on these awards? Because I see odds on there. Are there people actually gambling?
Not with money, but yes.